Today, the newspapers are saying that the Motability scheme costs the government £3.5 billion a year, with the big news that the government is going to clamp down on people purchasing BMWs, Mercedes and other luxury cars through the scheme. However, is this true, or is this just another government fabrication, a smokescreen from what's actually going on? We're going to bury down into the details of all of this and more, but before you do that, please just do like and subscribe to this channel. We are a new channel. I am trying to grow the viewership here. I do really appreciate your support and I do appreciate your comments below. Okay, so we're going to have a look at the article in today's Daily Telegraph in just a second. And that's been reported that the luxury brands like BMW, Mercedes and other such cars will no longer be supported on Motability. Now, what is Motability? Motability is the largest leasing scheme in the UK for disabled drivers. It's supported by the government, run by the government effectively, and funded through people's personal independence payments or DLA payments. So, basically there are 880,000 vehicles on the road in the UK today through the Motability scheme. That's 880,000 disabled people that would not be able to get out on the road otherwise. Now that sounds like a huge amount of people, a huge amount of cars being given away. But actually, let's break this down further. Let's look into it a bit more. Because behind all sensationalism, and I think this started with Richard Tice in Reform, and then later with Zia Youssef in Reform as well. And it's been brought in by a few other politicians, and today the government's got hold of it as well, and just mysteriously made this big announcement about stopping the sale of BMWs on Motability. Okay, so first of all, Motability is a leasing scheme, it's not a purchase scheme. Okay, that people tend to get vehicles for a 3-year time period on Motability, and the costs of the Motability scheme are largely paid for, almost entirely paid for, by people's existing disability benefit money. This is not a new pot of money, it's just a transfer of money from one pot to another pot. So rather than paying the person the mobility component of the disability benefits, that gets paid to the Motability scheme instead. And because it's a mobility component, it's used to pay for the car, the maintenance, insurance, the tax, etc., etc. of the vehicle. Now, the Motability scheme itself actually purchases vehicles in bulk from the manufacturers at a discounted price. It leases them out to disabled drivers for 3 years, for sake of argument. And at the end of that scheme, it then sells the cars on again, and the proceeds from the sales of the car go back into the scheme and help fund it all over again. And the cost of the upfront payments, which a lot of cars have upfront payments on them, and the BMWs were one of those, were based upon the resale price of the car at the end of that 3-year period, based on the anticipated price it was going to be selling for. And so, and they're set off against the purchase price and the price agreed with the manufacturers. So there wasn't any additional cost to the government. It doesn't matter, whether you buy a Mini, whether you buy a BMW, whether you buy a Skoda, whether you buy a Ford Fiesta. And I say buy, I mean lease when I'm talking about buying here, through the Motability scheme. The cost to the government, the cost to taxpayers is exactly the same. And it makes no difference whatsoever. It doesn't make a difference, to you or to anybody else, whether someone on Motability is driving a BMW 1 Series or whether they're driving a Ford Focus or Ford Fiesta. So let's have a quick look at this article anyway, because I want to dispel some myths in here and break down the figures a bit more in detail. So the article is just in the Daily Telegraph today, and it just says benefit claimants cut off from BMWs and Mercedes in Motability scheme. Now there's been an outrage about this, and this has been really thrown about in the media a lot, like I just said. And this is a bit of a sensationalised article. It says taxpayer subsidised scheme says it will stop offering luxury models immediately. Now I contend to you this is nothing more than a political gambit. As I said just now, it makes no difference to the government, to the scheme, to the cost of the exchequer, to the cost of taxpayers, whether people are getting a BMW or whether they're getting a Mini, also made by BMW, but that's not the point. This is just a political point-scoring exercise. For all the people that feel unjust that someone has to go out to work for 40 hours a week and they can't afford to buy a BMW, and the perception is that somebody lounging around on benefits will be able to get a BMW, and no, that's not fair. Now, with all greatest respect in the world, it's not about fairness, really, is it? It's about jealousy. That I contend that people are jealous that disabled people can get a car and say not have to pay for it. And they are paying for it, by the way. We'll come to the figures in a moment. But there's jealousy in there that perceivably having cars that are bought and paid for them, and then given to them, and they have to buy them themselves. I will contend, in reverse, that having a disability, particularly physical disability. I am a disabled driver. I have used a mobility scheme for the last 30 odd years. I did have BMW on it myself recently. That's recently gone back, but I still had one. We did pay a big upfront payment on it, but again, I didn't feel any guilt or remorse about that because the cost to the government is exactly the same no matter what car you have. It doesn't make any difference. And more to the point is that cost is already pre-allocated. I changed my mobility allowance for the last 30 odd years and got a Motability car in exchange. It was a great deal for me. It's kept me on the road. It's helped, massively support me and millions of other drivers over the years. Excuse my dog there. So let's just go into this article here for a moment. So we'll go further down on here. It says that disability benefit claimants will be cut off from leasing BMWs and Mercedes through the taxpayer subsidised scheme. Okay, as just mentioned, this scheme is actually paid for by people's personal independence payments or DLA payments or war pension mobility services payments. So it isn't an additional cost. No, this is slightly misinformation, bordering on disinformation, but it's certainly misleading. People, and certainly the government's been misleading people, and so is Reform on this issue. Motability, obviously being run by the government, it has to bow to government pressure. And Motability today said it would immediately stop offering the luxury models, as well as cars made by Audi, Lexus and Alfa Romeo, as part of an overhaul focused on vehicles that meet people's disability needs and represent value and purpose. Now, this is just a gambit. It's just a political gambit. And I've said to you several times now that there's no difference to the cost of anybody. Whether someone's driving a Lexus or a Skoda, it doesn't make any difference. All it is perception. And even for the normal cars, you often have to pay a decent upfront payment on them as well. If you want some of the higher models, some of the better specs, some of the extra things you might want to get with them. But Motability already do ensure that cars meet your needs or go through people meeting their needs. It goes on to say that the change means claimants who are currently driving cars made by these manufacturers may have to switch to another brand next time they change vehicle under their scheme. That's all at the end of the 3-year lease period or 5-year lease period, whatever it is they've got with the Motability. And it goes, Motability have declined to comment. Sorry, Mercedes have declined to comment on the shake-up. While BMW said it would be disappointing for the many BMW customers who participated in the scheme, and it will be. That it's a very popular car. The BMW 1 Series is a very popular car on the scheme. I was speaking to the guy at the garage when we had ours. It's just one of the most popular Motability vehicles for a lot of people. And people do have to pay £2,000 or £3,000 up front for it when they get it, which you don't get back at the end of the scheme. And then obviously you have to give the car back at the end of the scheme, so you don't get any return for that £3,000 you put up front. But anyway, let's move on. It says Mini, which is owned by BMW, is not affected because that's not classed as a luxury car, inverted commas. So Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, has raised concerns that it was inappropriate for the scheme to offer a premium motoring experience. Now, I massively contest this. This is not Rachel Reeves that suggested this. This is reacting to what Reform are saying, to what Zia Youssef was saying, and what Richard Tice has been saying, and other members of the Reform Party and some in Conservative as well. And other people generally speaking, that said this perception or misperception out there. But Rachel Reeves didn't really raise concerns about it. That she's reacted to something somebody else has said as usual. And she is, she is just doing something that makes it look politically good right before the budget, which is coming out tomorrow. No, it makes no. I'm not going to repeat myself again. It's understood that the latest changes are aimed at ensuring the programme remains financially sustainable and retains the public support. Okay, so the scheme. So just let's go through that then. So for financial sustainability, okay, that just to break it down, that a person receiving the higher rate of personal independence payment mobility element will receive roughly £3,692 per year. It works out £11,000 over a 3-year lease period. Okay, that money they give to the government or give to Motability scheme to fund for the car instead. Okay, they said there's 880,000 people using this scheme at the moment. Okay, so if you do the bare maths, you've got like 880,000 people using this scheme, and instead of the people themselves receiving that £3,692 a year, they are giving that to Motability, and at the end of that, the Motability scheme, it says it's costing 3.5. So the Motability consumed a record 2.8 billion taxpayer cash. However, if we take that 880,000 and multiply it by £3,692 a year, we're getting a figure between 3.2 and 3.3 billion pounds that actually, that is going to Motability. So the Motability scheme is self-sustaining. That is not an additional cost to anybody at all. It is actually self-sustaining. And it's already been allocated. It's not new money, it's not money that's got to be found, it's not money that is cut from somewhere. It is just a reallocation. Instead of giving it to the customer, they're giving it to the Motability scheme instead. And if you stop being on a Motability scheme, then the money will come back to you, which is what I've just done recently. And then to go on further than that, there's a net benefit actually to the scheme as well. So there are roughly, and it's an estimate, and I have used AI for this, so it may be slightly out one way or the other, but it is estimated that there are 34,000 jobs in the UK that are based on the Motability scheme. That's in the support, in the sales, in the manufacturing, in the related industries to those things, to after sales, to selling it in the second-hand market afterwards, and all the peripheral industries that support the Motability scheme. There are 34,000 people being employed in that scheme. And from that, it is estimated it's bringing in an actual net contributor to UK GDP of £4.3 billion. So it's actually £1 billion net benefit to the UK economy rather than a cost. Okay, that's a huge difference. It's a huge, huge difference. And even if there's 100 million one way or the other on this and it's slightly out, these are close enough to say that it is an accurate suggestion that it is a net benefit to the UK economy. Let's just go back to the article for a moment. Okay, so we've just discussed that. Concerns have also been raised that it emerged that thousands of people have exaggerated illnesses to require their cars. Entirely possible, but that isn't down to the Motability scheme. I have to reiterate this. That this is where this article gets a little bit lazy. It's a very lazily written article, in my opinion. It says claimant swaps on all of the mobility payments for the leasing deal, which I've just said about. It covers the cost of insurance, roadside assistance, and maintenance. It does. Most cars up to 27,000 can be acquired without any upfront payment. I don't know about this. I don't think this figure is necessarily entirely accurate, but it doesn't really matter. Again, it mentions the BMW drops that in there. Again, it doesn't matter because it's sold for far more money at the end of the scheme than anything else is. Again, Motability, and I'm going to really just bury into this. Motability has faced growing scrutiny of the broad range of conditions under which the claimants may qualify, such as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, anxiety, and autism. Okay, I want to be really clear here. Motability do not make the decisions about who gets DLA, disability living allowance in children, or adult disability payments in Scotland, or personal independent payments for adults in England, or war pensioners mobility supplement. No, Motability do not make decisions for that. No, this article is very, very lazy. It's nothing to do with them. The DWP makes the decisions on who gets the benefits. The DWP does the assessments for these things. There's nothing to do with Motability. So this is factually incorrect, and I think it's generally misleading. And it's putting onus onto Motability that it doesn't have. There's nothing. Motability has nothing to do with the benefits. It may well be the case that there are people with ADHD, autism, and anxiety getting PIP. That may well be the case. I'm not going to comment on that because there are some people may be deserving of it and other people less so. That we've seen a massive increase in the amount of PIPs recently being awarded, and I would, even a disabled person, I would have to question the amount of people with anxiety that have physical disabilities. I wouldn't say that you're too anxious to walk 50 meters. I don't see that. There may be some mitigating circumstances for some people, maybe, but I do think that the mobility element of PIP probably shouldn't be used for people with anxiety disorders, I feel. But again, that's open for discussion on that, and do let me know your thoughts below. I think that obviously cars are about mobility, and mobility is about physicality, whether you can physically get yourself from one place to another. It's not about your mental health. It's not about your other kind of health. In my opinion, and some people argue that it causes them too much anxiety to use a bus. Whatever. I don't necessarily buy that. But I'm not going to get into all the details on that on this article today. I do think there's been a massive, or not. I know there's been a massive upsurge, in personal independence payments and disability payments over the last 5 years since COVID, and a lot of them have been mental health related. Do I agree with that? Probably not. Not for a majority of those cases. I don't think that needs to be the case. I don't think it should be long-term sick and disabled, and I don't think most of those things are physical disabilities either. But that is a separate investigation, a separate thing to be looked into. In relationship to this article, the Minister said the scheme was a lifeline to disabled people in the community, while framing it as a major contributor to Britain's car industry. It is. If you take that 880,000 figure of cars produced every year, motor cars on the road, that is almost 300,000 cars a year, that are produced for the Motability scheme. And in the last 12 months, there have been roughly 1.9 million cars sold. So it's about 5% thereabouts of the overall, between 5 and 7% of the overall cars sold in the UK have been sold through the Motability scheme. It is quite a lot. And I think it's a massive net contributor to GDP, to countries' employment, to keeping people in jobs. So the Motability is now the country's largest fleet operator, with around 815 leased cars. There are different figures floating around for this. It could be a bit more than that now, I think. Let me just have a mouthful of tea. So, so it goes on to say a little bit, as they always do in these articles, the Motability scheme makes a difference to disabled people's lives every day, and customers tell us a lifeline for their freedom and independence. So I can tell you, as a disabled person, and I have used the scheme for many, many years, as I said, it has been an absolute lifeline. I'm very, very grateful to it all the time, for it has enabled me where I would have been very much stuck otherwise. Very grateful to this service. I've had a number of different vehicles over the years, for different needs. I've had different numbers of children and stuff like that over the years. But I think we just need to really get down to the facts with it. The fact is that the scheme pays for itself. There's no additional cost for it. It doesn't matter what car people have. The thing about people on benefits shouldn't have luxury cars. That I'm going to say, I'm sorry, that's a jealousy thing. That I understand it. I understand where that's coming from on one level. But that is just jealousy. If it doesn't cost you anymore, if it doesn't cost the taxpayer anymore, it doesn't cost people, the government anymore, it makes no difference. That's just a jealousy thing. It's just a perception issue. That's all it is. And you have to get over that. And I'm sorry, but just get over it. It's just ridiculous. Obviously, leave me a comment if you think differently. I'm sure you will do. Some people. the government restricting these things is just nothing more than a political stunt. It is just a shambles. Right before the budget, when we're about to give away billions and other things in the budget, and I do support some of the things like the two-child benefit cap, but I'm not getting into that in this article either. That rather than looking at optics and sound bites and things that don't matter and aren't important, we should actually think about, okay, we are genuinely giving cars to people with mobility issues, in the trade for their mobility allowance, and the scheme pays for itself in that way. And then 3 years later, those cars get sold on. The people get a new car if they still maintain receipt of their benefits, and that goes on. And those cars are sold through a second-hand market. And that it's one of the largest contributors to the second-hand car market. And these cars are genuinely looked after, they're serviced every year, they're maintained, they're generally in good condition with low mileage, they're in high demand, they're good quality cars, and they're a significant contributor to the second-hand car market in the UK. So it all feeds back into the economy. It's a self-fulfilling thing. It just feeds back and it works well. And if the Motability scheme itself was scrapped, there would be a huge knock-on effect through these 34,000 job losses, the impact on the automotive industry and everybody else on there, as well as the limitations of 800,000 disabled people no longer being able to have their transport, which would be astronomically problematic for millions and millions of people. So I think the common sense conclusion from this is that this scheme is a good thing. That it's a benefit to the country, it's a benefit to disabled people, it doesn't cost any more money, and that we should be supporting it rather than criticising it. And we should be staying away from the sound bites and the rhetoric and actually just stick with the facts. Now, as always, do let me know your thoughts below. I'm sure you'll be varied thoughts on this one, hopefully you'll get to see it. Please do share it with your friends as well. I'd love to know what your feedback is on this. As always, I appreciate you being here. Thanks very much, and I'll see you in the next one.